Could the United States be on the brink of collapse by 2025? It's a question that might sound extreme, but history has a way of repeating itself in patterns we can't ignore. Over the last 250 years, three major governments have toppled under the weight of their own divisions. First, there was France in the late 1700s, where a revolution tore through the streets, fueled by inequality and a broken system. Then came Russia in the early 1900s, where a crumbling empire gave way to chaos and change. And more recently, the Soviet Union in the 1990s, where economic strain and political decay led to its sudden fall. Each time, the signs were there. Rising tensions, deepening divides, and a growing sense that the system couldn't hold. So, could America be next? The parallels are unsettling and the clock is ticking. There's this idea floating around that the United States in 2025 is following the same pattern, step by step, as France did back in the late 1700s. Think about it. Weak leadership, a government that's more interested in lining its own pockets than serving the people. Sound familiar? It's like looking back at King Louis XVI's reign, where the monarchy was so out of touch, so corrupt, that it set the stage for revolution. The parallels are eerie. When leaders lose the trust of the people, when they put their own power and wealth above everything else, history has a way of repeating itself. And if we're not careful, if we don't learn from the past, well, we might just find ourselves reliving it. The French Revolution wasn't just a moment, it was a storm that tore through the old world and left nothing untouched. It started with hunger, with anger, with people who'd had enough of kings and nobles living in palaces while they starved. The streets of Paris ran red with fury, and by the time it was over, the monarchy was gone, the king's head had rolled, and the very idea of power had been turned inside out. But revolutions don't end when the old rulers fall. The new ones took their place, and they were just as ruthless. The Reign of Terror began, a time when suspicion was enough to send you to the guillotine. 40,000 people, men, women, even children, were executed for political crimes, for whispers, for looking at someone the wrong way. The revolution had promised liberty, but it delivered blood instead. And when the dust settled, France was changed forever. The old order was dead, but the new one was built on bones. The revolution had shown the world what happens when people rise up, but it also showed what happens when power goes unchecked. The echoes of those years still ripple through history, a warning and a promise all at once. The streets of Petrograd were a world apart in those bitter winter months of 1917. On one side, the grand palaces of the nobility glittered under the pale sun, their golden domes and marble halls untouched by the suffering outside. Inside, the aristocrats feasted on caviar and champagne, their laughter ringing through rooms warmed by fires that burned endlessly. The Tsar, Nicholas II, sat at the head of it all, his rule as fragile as the crystal glasses his courtiers raised in toast. But beyond those gilded walls, the city groaned under the weight of hunger and cold. Workers toiled in factories for pennies a day, their hands raw and their bodies weak. Bread lines stretched for blocks, mothers clutching empty sacks, their children's cries lost in the wind. The war had bled the country dry, and the Tsar's generals sent more men to die in the mud of the front, while his ministers whispered empty promises in the halls of power. The people had had enough. The whispers in the factories and the taverns grew louder, sharper. The Tsar's incompetence was no longer just a joke, it was a death sentence. And in the shadows, the revolution was stirring, waiting for the moment to rise. The Russian Revolution wasn't just a single event. It was a storm that tore through the country, reshaping everything in its path. It started with the fall of the Tsar in 1917, a moment that should have brought hope, but instead it opened the door to chaos. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power, promising peace, land, and bread, but what followed was anything but peaceful. The revolution sparked a brutal civil war, pitting the Red Army against the Whites, a mix of monarchists, liberals, and foreign powers, all trying to crush the new Soviet state. Towns became battlegrounds, families were torn apart, and hunger spread like wildfire. By the time the dust settled, 10 million people were dead, not just from bullets and bombs, but from starvation and disease. It was a war that didn't just change Russia, it changed the world. The old order was gone, and in its place rose something new, something that would shape the 20th century in ways no one could have imagined. The revolution wasn't just about politics, it was about survival, about who would control the future. And the cost, higher than anyone could have paid. The sun hung heavy over Havana, its golden light glinting off the chrome of sleek American cars that purred through the streets. But those cars belonged to the lucky few. The rest walked, their shoes worn thin, their stomachs hollow. The air smelled of salt and sweat, of rum and desperation. In the grand hotels, men in crisp white suits sipped cocktails, laughing as they counted stacks of bills. They were Batista's men, his cronies, their pockets lined with the sweat of the poor. The casinos never slept, the dice never stopped rolling, and the money never stopped flowing, upward, always upward. Down in the slums, children played in the dirt, their ribs pressing against their skin. Mothers whispered prayers over empty pots, their husbands long gone to the cane fields or the prisons. The government promised change, but change only came for those who could afford it. The rest got bullets and broken promises. The streets hummed with whispers of revolution. Men in dark corners spoke of a man named Fidel, of a fight that was coming. The rich didn't hear them. They were too busy counting their money, too busy pretending the world wasn't burning around them. But the fire was coming, and it would not be kind. In the late 1950s, Fidel Castro led a revolution that toppled the Cuban government, promising freedom and justice for the people. What started as a fight against corruption and inequality soon turned into something else entirely. Castro and his allies, including Che Guevara, took control, and by the early 1960s, Cuba was declared a socialist state under communist rule. At first, many Cubans supported the revolution, hoping for a better life. But as time went on, Castro's government grew more authoritarian. Political opponents were silenced, free speech was restricted, and the economy was tightly controlled by the state. Private businesses were seized, and anyone who spoke out against the regime faced harsh consequences: imprisonment, exile, or worse. Castro aligned Cuba with the Soviet Union, turning the island into a key player in the Cold War. The United States responded with a trade embargo, cutting off Cuba from its biggest economic partner. For decades, life in Cuba became a struggle. Food shortages, crumbling infrastructure, and limited freedoms became the norm. Yet despite the hardships, Castro's government held on, using propaganda and repression to maintain power. For 60 years, Cuba remained under communist rule, first under Fidel and later under his brother Raúl. The revolution that once promised hope became a dictatorship that outlasted generations. Even after Fidel's death in 2016, the system he built endured, leaving a complicated legacy, one of resilience and suffering, of revolution and repression. You ever notice how things tend to blow up when people expect one thing and get another? It's like when you're promised a feast and handed a crust of bread. That's when the real trouble starts. The folks at the top, the ones calling the shots, they get comfortable, thinking everything's fine as long as they're fine. But down below, where the rest of us are just trying to get by, that gap between what we're told and what we actually get, it grows wider and wider. And then one day someone says, enough. Maybe it's over something small like a tax on tea or a fare hike on the bus, but it's never really about the small thing. It's about all the times before when the people in charge didn't listen, didn't care, or just plain forgot that the world doesn't run on their say-so alone. That's when the streets get loud. That's when the old rules don't mean much anymore. History's got a way of repeating itself when the folks at the top stop paying attention. They think they're untouchable, that the system's too big to break. But systems are just made of people, and people, well, people have a way of surprising you when they've got nothing left to lose. The year is 2025, and the gap between the haves and the have-nots has never felt wider. Walk down any street in America and you'll see it. The gleaming towers of the ultra-rich casting long shadows over neighborhoods where families are one paycheck away from disaster. The top 1% now controls nearly a third of the country's wealth, and it shows. Luxury condos sit empty while tent cities sprawl beneath overpasses. Private jets crisscross the sky, burning fuel like it's nothing, while folks at the gas station wince at the price of a gallon. The middle class? It's been squeezed so thin it's practically invisible. People work 2-3 jobs just to keep the lights on, while a handful of billionaires make more in an hour than most will see in a lifetime. The stock market's booming, but only if you're already rich enough to play the game. For everyone else, it's a daily grind with no safety net. And the worst part? It's not just about money, it's about power. The wealthiest don't just have more, they decide more. What gets built, who gets heard, even what the future looks like. The rest? They're just trying to hold on. You know, there was a time when folks believed in the system. They trusted that the government had their backs, that hard work would pay off, and that the American dream was real. But somewhere along the way, things went sideways. The people in charge started playing by their own rules, lining their pockets while the rest of us got left behind. It's not just one thing, it's a whole mess of it. Politicians making promises they never keep, bureaucrats tangled in red tape, and laws that seem to favor the rich and powerful over everyone else. And let's be honest, it's not just corruption, it's incompetence too. Programs that don't work, infrastructure crumbling, and a healthcare system that feels like it's designed to bankrupt you. The middle class? It's been squeezed dry. Wages stagnant, costs skyrocketing, and the ladder to success looking more like a greased pole. People are fed up. They see the same old faces in Washington, the same empty speeches, the same broken promises. And when you lose faith in the institutions that are supposed to protect you, what's left? A whole lot of anger, a whole lot of frustration, and a country that feels like it's slipping through our fingers? The American middle class didn't just shrink, it got hollowed out. And if we don't fix this, if we don't demand better, who knows what's left to believe in? You know, history has this way of repeating itself like a song stuck on a loop. And right now, the U.S. is humming a tune we've heard before. Stage 4 of the revolution pattern. It's that moment when people start looking at the institutions they once trusted and thinking, wait a minute, this isn't working for us anymore. The courts, the government, even the media, all those pillars that used to feel solid, they're starting to feel more like sand slipping through fingers. It's not about one big event or a single breaking point. It's the slow drip of doubt, the quiet conversations at dinner tables, the way folks roll their eyes when another promise gets broken. Faith isn't just shaken, it's slipping away. And once that happens, well, history tells us what comes next. The question isn't whether we're in it, it's what we do now that we know. So here's the thing, when you look at history, you start to see this pattern, right? It's like a playbook that gets reused over and over. And guess what? The U.S. is running that same play right now. Think about it. Rising inequality, people losing faith in institutions, leaders who can't or won't fix the problems. Sound familiar? It's not just bad luck, it's how these things go. You had the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, even the fall of Rome. Same ingredients, different centuries. And now, we're mixing the same batch. The signs are all there. The question isn't if it's happening, but how far along we already are. And if you're waiting for someone to step in and stop it, well, history's got a pretty clear answer on how that usually turns out. You know, history has this funny way of repeating itself, especially when it comes to governments. If you look back, you'll see the same mistakes playing out over and over, leaders ignoring the people, systems getting too bloated, or just plain old corruption taking over. But here's the thing, if we pay attention to those patterns, we can actually avoid the same pitfalls. Take the fall of ancient Rome, for example. They stretched themselves too thin, spent money they didn't have, and let their leaders get too comfortable. Sound familiar? Fast forward a few centuries, and you see the same issues popping up in different places. The key is recognizing these patterns early. When a government starts acting like it's above the people, or when it can't keep its promises, that's a red flag. The takeaway? Stay informed, hold leaders accountable, and don't let history's mistakes become today's failures. Because if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it, and nobody wants that. So here's the thing. If we want to keep moving forward, we've got to make sure everyone's got a fair shot. That means pushing for economic equality, not just talking about it. When people have what they need to thrive, the whole system works better. And let's not forget transparency. Governments need to be open about where the money's going and who's making the decisions. No backroom deals, no hidden agendas, just clear, honest leadership. So here's your action. Next time you're at the ballot box or in a community meeting, ask the tough questions. Demand answers. Support leaders who put people first, not just the ones with the deepest pockets, because that's how we make sure this success sticks around and the failures don't repeat. The situation is critical and time is running out.